Good afternoon, good Friday afternoon. Golden Black Live. You can read, but it's Roosevelt Barnes and Brian Newbert with us. It's a thrill just to have Rosie on there. He and I go way back, but we're not even old enough to say that we were in college together, but we were.
Yeah.
And you're still looking young and well, and we're glad to have you here. Purdue, Maryland tomorrow, and certainly the Boilermakers have a week off. Just looking back at your time as a player, you had a momentum game against Nebraska. Now you sit for a week. What does that mean, if anything, from your perspective?
Well, it gives them a chance to kind of regroup and heal a little bit if they can. Although some of the practices I think this week have been really physical, so you want to keep your edge that way. So I don't know how much healing you get done when when you got Isaac Haas and AJ and Biggie and Vince and those guys under the basket, but it gives you a chance to kind of take a deep breath and get ready for this stretch run down the end.
And that's going to be important as well. Brian?
Yeah, we talk about how they have a week off. Well, they don't. They just don't play a game this week. They still practice, and at Purdue, practices are like games. So he's absolutely right. It is important for Purdue to get a little bit healthier than they are. Biggie's got to get his ankle back to where it was. Vince has to get his knee back to where it was. But you're still practicing every day, so it's not like they're just kind of sleeping in hyperbolic chambers or something like that to get healthy. They're still going pretty hard. So, perhaps they use this week off a little bit to get back to some basics. I don't know. There's some things defensively they can probably improve. The turnovers are still a little bit of an issue all across the board. So I'm sure there's some things they shine kind of a light on in practice this week in terms of fundamentals and whatnot.
Biggie's ankle getting better, just from that standpoint. Will he be 100% tomorrow or close to it, or how do you look at that?
Well, I think at this time of the year you're never 100%. I think his ankle has gotten much better, but he still has some other bruises as far as I think he got knee in the thigh this week. Again, sometimes practice here is a little tougher than the games because of the size of the guys that you're playing against.
Yeah.
So he'll be ready to go, though, I believe.
Yeah, that's going to be a big thing. Obviously, Maryland will be all that Purdue can handle. A front line that's formidable, but a backcourt that's extremely good. Have you got a chance to watch them play much this year?
Yeah, I try to watch a lot of basketball. Not only Big Ten, but just around the country. I have had a chance to see Maryland play. They are a big team. They have very good guard play with Suleiman and Trimble. So it's going to be a challenge for us, but I think it's going to be a challenge for them too.
Yeah.
They have to deal with us, and I'm excited to see what we can do against them, really. If you look at some of their games, I think they're in the top 5.
Yeah, they're ranked fourth.
They're number 4. They've had some close games.
Close games.
They're all close games. They found a way to win. We've either blown teams out or we've lost. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens when we get a chance to match up against them.
What's going to be interesting about this game, too, is these are two teams not accustomed to playing against front courts that can match their front court, size on size. These are two pretty comparable front lines, and it'll be interesting to see which team has the advantage tomorrow, because it's going to be a little bit of a foreign concept probably for both teams that are used to kind of towering over everybody they play, and that sort of disparity sort of almost dictating the terms of play to some extent.
Have you and you get a chance to travel? You've been to several road games, and obviously you're there for all of the home games. You've got a rest of a family that as well that you have to mind to as well. But do you like watching the games on TV when you're watching Caleb play, or is that hard for you to? You're not a guy in the stands that's real demonstrative necessarily, but is it hard for you to sit and watch on TV, or would you rather be there?
I think there's advantages to being there, but I think there's advantages to watching it on television too. When I'm at the game, your children even when I played,
Yeah.
and even when I played for Purdue and when I played in the pros, I could always find my parents,
Yeah.
and I could. In the Silverdome, it held 80,000 people, and I felt like I could hear my mother
Yeah.
or my dad.
Yeah.
So the advantage, and sometimes, there's little things that I see that Biggie should be doing, and he knows what hand signals,
Yeah.
what certain things mean. So I think there's an advantage there watching him play. But I like being at home because I can actually yell at home and no one gets offended.
Yeah.
And I don't embarrass him either. So it's fun either way.
Yeah. Is that dynamic with him? I mean, seems pretty stoic. You are pretty stoic, in terms of your personality. Does he come back after games and say, "Hey, why'd you say this or not?" Or do you have what kind of how do you go back through your evaluation of the game after it's over?
Well, I typically we typically try not to talk after the game because emotions are high, whether good or bad. I'm probably a lot like my father was to me. I had a game in high school where I was 14 for 16 from the field, and I came home and I was feeling pretty good, and he was sitting eating at the table when I got there, and I said, "What'd you think, Pop? What'd you think, Daddy?" And he was like, "Why'd you miss those 2 shots?" And so I learned a lesson from that. I try to wait till the next day, and then we sit down and we talk about what he's done good and what we need to improve on. So that's typically what we do, to give it a 24-hour cooling off period.
Not a bad strategy.
It
not
would
a
seem
bad
like,
strategy.
though, that he's pretty compatible with that sort of approach because he holds himself to such a high standard.
Right.
Anyway, so you guys might be thinking on the same wavelength anyway.
Right. Biggie is he's not one to. I mean, he's about perfection, So sometimes and I've told him to be great. You have to have higher expectations of yourself than anybody else, and he does. He carries a very high standard of what he expects to do and how he wants to perform.
Now, you've had in your your playing life, your professional life, and in your profession, a high standard of performance. How do you, even if you're not just with Biggie, but with anybody else, when they don't meet expectations and they fall short, in the short term, what's your message to try to get them? As a teacher or as a father, do you have to really know the person to be able to get them to get to the next level, or do you have a kind of a standard approach to how you want to give them confidence, give them encouragement, but realize that standard's got to be higher?
Yeah, I think it's an individual thing. I think that you have to know the child or the person's personality, and then. I think you also they have to know why you're saying what you're saying. Biggie, you really don't have to yell at anymore. And my other children, my oldest son, he was a very good player in his own right, and my second son, they were very good, but they were all a little different. My oldest son, Jovan, I didn't have to really yell at him. He was very focused, motivated, tasked, and handled the task. My middle son was, you had to get on him a little bit more. And then Biggie, once you tell him what to do, then he does it. But I think if you tell them why, if they understand why, and if they can see what you're trying to accomplish, I think they'll buy into it, and then it makes it much easier.
Yeah.
He's so intelligent, so analytical in his mind. Do you have to explain things less to him, or does he just kind of figure things out on his own oftentimes?
Well, I think it's both. A lot of times he figures things out on his own, but you have to explain things to him too, because he's always thinking, He said, well, I don't understand why I have to do that.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't make
Yeah,
sense.
kind of goes both ways.
Right,
Yeah.
and so then you have to explain to him. And then once you tell him something, if you tell him this, if you tell him something on Monday or today, then 2 weeks later, and you come back and he's going to bring it back up to you. So you have to be consistent in what you say, you know, and he's going to hold you accountable too. Just like you hold him accountable, he's going to hold you accountable. That's not how you told me to play the pick and roll. Are we going to play the pick and roll this way? That's not why you told me,
Right.
you know, he'll bring it back to you. So you need to be consistent in what you say with him.
The dynamic, obviously, he's got a coaching staff with him as well, and Matt Painter and his group lead him on the floor. How do you work that dynamic of knowing what the coaches says, and maybe there may be times when you might see something a little bit differently, but how do you manage that with the coaching staff, or just with how your approach is to Biggie with respect to what they may be teaching?
Well, Matt and the coaching staff, they've been great with me. They've given me a lot of, we've had a lot of interaction. But,
Excuse
you know, Matt and the coaching staff, they're the coaches.
Yeah.
And so the thing that I've told Big and I've told my other kids is you do what the coach tells you to do.
Yeah.
And you control only what you can control. And fundamentals are fundamentals. Fundamentals will carry you in any sport. So what we try to do is work on the fundamentals. We've been working on the same fundamentals since he came with me. We do pretty much the same routine every day. Because if you have your fundamentals and your bases down, then those things will carry you regardless of what the coaching style is. So they let me talk to them. I don't know how much they listen. I think they allow me to talk, but they're going to do what they want to do anyway because they're the coach. So that's what I try to tell Biggie, and that's our approach. We just do what you can do and handle what you can handle, and then when it's time for you to perform, do the best you can and let the chips fall.
Yeah.
How do you feel like he's handling college basketball? I mean, this is a guy used to dominating every level he's played at, and obviously it's never easy when you go from one level to another. It's just how's he kind of handling things? You feel like?
Well, I think he's handling things. I think he's doing a great job. You know, he came here because of the talent that's here. He's got a great relationship with his teammates. And he's making the adjustment to not being the focal point of the offense. They really don't run a lot of stuff to him. Therefore, he has to figure out how to help the team win in other ways than getting the ball in his sweet spot quite a bit. So I think that's a good thing for him because it's teaching him how to be productive when you're not the guy.
Yeah, that's a lesson that you got to learn, I think, early on. Even if you're going to be the guy, which he is, he is so much of that. Question from Adam, and we're going to get into Rosie's some of my favorite stories when Roe was playing at Purdue football, basketball, and baseball. He lettered in all three. But is it just expect all the expectations of Biggie and what what it takes to be a college or a big time college basketball athlete now? Would it even be possible to do what you did? In terms of a question from Adam, could it be possible to play football and basketball and even baseball in college? Is that even realistic anymore based on the expectations?
Well, I think it would be difficult because when we grew up, we played basketball year round. But when the season changed, we changed sports. And played football during football season, basketball during basketball, and baseball during baseball. He even ran track, you know. So I think it will be difficult. I don't think it's impossible. I think one of the challenges that you have today is, you know, all the coaches in whatever sport, they want all of your time.
Yeah.
And they want you to concentrate on their sport year round. And so, because when I was growing up, we didn't have 7-on-7 in the summertime. We didn't have AAU in the summertime. The only really organized sports we had was baseball in the summertime. And then you would go to the park and play against the old heads.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the reasons why basketball has changed so much is because in AAU basketball, I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. I think it has helped grow the sport. But when you go to the park and you play pickup basketball against the old guys, and there's 15 guys sitting on the sideline waiting to play, you learn how to play to win.
Yeah.
And you learn how to evaluate the person you're playing against quickly.
Yeah.
Because if you lose, you're going to sit out for an hour. And so I think that those things have changed, and because coaches now have expectation that they want you to concentrate on their sport year round, even into the high school level, it makes it tough. If the coaches would allow guys to play, I think more guys could possibly do it.
Yeah, in the second segment, we're going to get into all the great stories, all of them true, about Roe and his days in Fort Wayne and all the talent that was up there. We had a question also about from Adam about did Biggie ever seriously consider playing any football or any other sport besides basketball? With that frame, he certainly would be. I'm sure he'd be coveted by some NFL guys.
He actually played football 1 year in high school. He started at left tackle, and he started every game.
Yeah.
And there were some big time programs that were, recruiting him. Alabama was recruiting him, and a lot of SEC schools we heard from. Alabama was recruiting him pretty heavy.
Yeah.
But football is not a game that you can play if your heart is not in it.
Yeah.
Because basketball is a physical sport. Football, you have to rev yourself. It's insane.
Yeah.
And if you don't love the game, if you can't get hit in the mouth and enjoy it, then that's probably not the sport for you. And he was good, but his heart wasn't in it. And so I told him if you're not going to play football, this is what you have to do to become a basketball player. You have to change your lifestyle. And so he bought into that and decided that he wanted to just totally concentrate on basketball.
He's got a lot of things as a basketball player that you either kind of have or you don't. Just the way he understands basketball, some of the things he does, you just don't see in guys his age very much, just in terms of his understanding, his savvy, his kind of sense for the game. How did he kind of develop? You talked about, playing against the old heads when you were a kid, and that's how you learned to play the game a certain way. And he grew up in that, that AAU era that we were just discussing. How did he kind of develop that sort of, basketball sense?
Well, I think he's a naturally gifted and intelligent young man, and he played against his older brothers, and I think that helped him. And then he's very observant. He sits and he doesn't talk a lot until you get to know him, and then he'll watch, and he's listening to everything you say. Like I said, he holds you accountable too. So I think that one of his strengths is his basketball IQ, and sometimes he's had turnovers because he sees things that other people don't see. He anticipates that something's going to happen. He'll throw it, and it doesn't. Yeah. And so he's had to make adjustments in, and I think he's done a much better job of that here recently. Making sure that he's on the same page with everybody else.
I would imagine when he had to post up Carl when he was a kid, he probably had to learn some tricks to get that ball up in the air.
Oh, yeah.
Carl, for those who don't know, is his older brother, largest human being I think I've ever seen in my life, and that includes Isaac Haas.
Yeah, he's a big
Yeah.
he's a big man, and then he's got a brother Corey. He's like 6'6". He's got a brother Cortland that's 6'7", and he's got two sisters that are 6'3". So he didn't get a break from anybody.
Run to the litter, huh?
He barely even stands out from that standpoint. We're going to let Brian head off to Indianapolis and on his way to Washington and Maryland for the Boilermakers matchup tomorrow. We're going to take a 2-minute break, and we're going to switch gears a little bit with Rosie in segment 2 and talk about his playing days, and a lot of great memories from that, and including a Big Ten championship, a Final Four trip, playing for 3 different coaches. You had playing 3 different sports. You actually played for 5 different coaches, I guess you could say, from that standpoint. A lot to hit, a lot of good memories to hit on here in the next segment as well. We'll take a 2-minute break and see you in a couple minutes on Golden Black Live.